In kind, when I was 17, I didn't really think I had much going on with me as a human being, but lo and behold, I had a stomach ache. It turned out I was having appendicitis. I went to the hospital. I was getting an ultrasound. They wanted to confirm I was dealing with what I was dealing with. And during that ultrasound, the clinician at the time basically told me, hey, this is going to sound strange, but I can't find one of your kidneys. Okay, let's go, double check our homework here on this ultrasound. Well, it turns out after a second ultrasound and many more tests, it turns out I only have one kidney. I was probably only born with that one. That kidney also has multiple cysts. So I have what's properly diagnosed as polycystic kidney disease.
Welcome to another Bootstrapped Unicorns. Today I have the privilege of hanging out with Conrad Ruiz. Now Conrad I know through a mutual friend named Mills, and she connected us because apparently we're like-minded entrepreneurs, and after our first conversation I see why. Conrad has done a brilliant job of focusing his professional life on balance, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. He is the owner and founder of WellAware. And I will let him define what WellAware does, but suffice it to say that every entrepreneur, especially those who are working very hard to grow and scale their business, need to consider what Conrad has to say in his personal story and what he does in his business, because I, like many of you, sometimes find myself working harder, not smarter, and doing the things that take me away from a lot of the very important things in life which aren't in your business, like my wife and my kids. And so you may be experiencing something similar, and there's a certain amount of freedom that I think you're going to discover today as we talk to Conrad. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Conrad Ruiz. Conrad, I'm so glad you're here. How you doing?
Thanks, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing swell. Thank you so much.
Swell. I like that word. That's actually a good word. Sometimes when if everything's swell, then everything's really swell. I don't think you can say that unhappy.
It would be really tough, unless your sarcasm's on point. Yeah.
I suppose, yes. And there are days where I am a master of sarcasm, but today I'm just really happy to be hanging out with you. So, Conrad, I like starting these conversations because the audience likely doesn't know you. And so if you're following, does happen to be hanging out and listening to this podcast, hi, Conrad fans. But let's start with, you've been on a journey to WellAware for quite a while. But until we define WellAware, I think it would be hard for our audience to stay with us and get to the culmination where you've discovered this WellAware thing. So let's spend just a couple of minutes. What is WellAware? What do you guys do?
Yeah, so WellAware at its core, we're a time management consulting firm. That's how we like to introduce ourselves to people. In general, businesses come to us when they have what they define as a time management problem. And as you can imagine, I think a lot of the people in this world will say, I'm running out of time to do all the things that I really care about doing, and I somehow have to get to them, and this is the struggle I live in, plain and simple. What we do in response to that, we basically come in and say, tell us more. Tell us about what's going on with your time. Show us how your calendar looks and how you go about your day. We really put ourselves up as students for operations. And as a result, our solution set is all about return on time as a value set. So we have virtual assistants who'll come in and they'll just take on responsibilities as they're identified and organized so that they can handle it. We have automation engineers who can take processes and workflows that either our team is doing or the businesses that we're working with are already performing. And we can say, let's not put this in anybody's hands. Let's put this in a tool or a system's hands. Sometimes the things that exist online, many different platforms, they already exist. They've already been built to solve these problems. So let's just integrate them. Let's implement them. That's how WellAware works at its core. We try to buy back time by taking the things that you need to get done and finding some other way to do them.
So what causes somebody to notice that they need to buy back time? And can you, what is the result? Can you tell me about what happens after you've bought it back?
Yeah. Josh, I think one of the funnest things about being in the world of operations is that nobody has anything to say to you unless something's wrong. So I think silence is golden. And in contrast, when something isn't working, people are going to feel it. Something is slipping through the cracks. Maybe in the world of sales, there are relationships who are not going through the pipeline successfully. It's taking too long to get back to people. Could be in the world of marketing, you aren't completing the workflow. Things aren't getting posted or published. Administratively, there could be a whole host of problems with respect to inboxes running rampant, tasks not being well managed or documented. So maybe things are getting done, but no one's actually saying, I'm marking it as complete. There are a number of ways in which people can find frustration due to the fact that their business isn't operating as they believe it should be. And that stuff rings like bells.
Got it. And so once you've bought back that time, I know silence is golden, but I know already from the couple of conversations we've had, you're the type of guy who's going to go knock on a door and find out, is this good or bad silence, and tell me about how things are going. What are you hearing once you have those great silent moments? What happens when people get their time back?
Yeah, so this is where things get really interesting for me, because I like to think about time not just from the perspective of business, but life as a whole. So when I work with people, I try to think about how their entire 24 hours are going to be operating. I do this because everyone is a part of their business. I think when it comes to what are the things that impact that, a huge part of it is, how are you eating? How are you sleeping? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you engaging in life outside of work? Because if you're not, and I've really just put you in this super efficient role within the world of work, but all you're doing is working, at some point that system is going to break. I've seen that time and time again. I've done it myself. And so that's the number one thing that I really try to avoid, is that kind of silence, but it's really in the background. It's sort of a quiet torture.
Um, so Miller, you're going to have to cut some things here because I'm having a senior moment, because right in the middle of that, I had this sage question and it just escapes me. So I'm just going to, backtrack a little bit for myself. Conrad, the buyback time that you do for people came from life circumstances that you have gone through. Your journey is interesting to me. And if you are you open to going back all the way to your college days? I think that's where you started. Your first business isn't this business, is it?
That's correct. And I'm more than happy to walk you through where everything started, if that's okay.
I think that would be good, because one, entrepreneurial journeys for us are fascinating and they're very instructive. But yours has a strikingly personal take towards the more recent days of your entrepreneurial journey that really gets me, honestly. Every time you talk about your dad, and I'm picturing my grandfather's face, and that's a very warm moment, and it means a lot. And so for those listening, wait till we get to that part, because it's a warm hug that you deserve today. So Conrad, let's go back to your college days. And what were you studying, which is the most brainy thing ever? And what did you plan to do with it?
Yeah. Josh, I went to school for biomedical engineering. I made this
That's
pursuit.
body rocket science, right?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can go about it. You can build prosthetics. You can get into the types of medical devices that you see across many hospitals. I specifically focused on the growth of tissues in laboratory settings. The sort of long-term implication of that is you end up, growing very fancy things that are supposed to be useful in surgical applications, or, our sort of Shangri-La moment, I think, in that particular industry is if we can take whole organs and reproduce them. And that would mean, it would mean a lot for people to not have to worry about whether or not they need to get, a kidney replaced, or if they're looking for, a liver transplant. It's kind of the nature of disaster when it comes to human injury. It's hard to just find replacement parts just lying around.
Right. Yeah. It's a little scary. Did you go into that with curiosity? Was it a vision? What was your goal when you originally went into biomedical engineering?
Yeah, I would say I definitely took on the initiative towards this industry for a couple of reasons. The one primary one, I think, was at the end of the day, my family really directed me towards STEM. My father was a gynecologist in his day. And so his world and studies of medicine had a particular influence on me to study biology and chemistry. In kind, when I was 17, I didn't really think I had much going on with me as a human being, but lo and behold, I had a stomach ache. It turned out I was having appendicitis. I went to the hospital. I was getting an ultrasound. They wanted to confirm I was dealing with what I was dealing with. And during that ultrasound, the clinician at the time basically told me, hey, this is going to sound strange, but I can't find one of your kidneys. This is not a big deal right now. Let's circle back on that. It's like one of those sort of weird conversations of like, this is important. We'll come back to this later. They took care of the appendicitis. And so immediately afterwards, we said, okay, let's go, double check our homework here on this ultrasound. Well, it turns out after a second ultrasound and many more tests, it turns out I only have one kidney. I was probably only born with that one. That kidney also has multiple cysts. So I have what's properly diagnosed as polycystic kidney disease. For those who may not want to look that up, there are two forms of polycystic kidney disease, a dominant version, if you will, and a recessive. The recessive one kills people very early on in life. And so thankfully, that's not the kind that I have. But I do have the dominant one, as far as we know. The sort of idea behind finding cysts in a kidney at this stage in my life is it's kind of an interesting paradox. We don't know where things are going to go. Maybe you could say I have Schrodinger's kidney. We'll see what happens when we open the box. But typically those with autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease, they tend to develop kidney complications somewhere in their 40s to 50s, typically resulting in kidney failure. It's just a byproduct of the cysts continuing to grow and mutate. Josh, I know this is a little bit graphic to share, but just earlier, before we started going live, you were highlighting about your friend with kidney stones.
Yeah.
The situation behind that is likely due to some kind of protein synthesis that at some point in that cascade is leading to this kidney stone development. And it just keeps happening. For similar parallel reasons, my cysts may continue to grow and form in multiple as a result of some protein change that doesn't start to really activate until people start to become older adults, those with the disease.
Got it.
Mind you, I didn't know all of this at 17. I specifically felt a little left out about all of this information. I was just kind of told, everything's going to be okay. We'll check on you every year. You're going to be fine. I was like, that's not really enough for me. So that was a big reason why I went to biomedical engineering. One, to really get closer to that understanding of what I was dealing with, but then also to say, hey, let's be solution set oriented about this and let's go solve this problem, which in that particular case was this ambitious call to action of let's go grow another kidney somehow.
Wow. Okay. So I had a hunch you had some clarity before you chose biomedical engineering. And what I find fascinating, and listeners are going to learn this, and I guess it's a foreshadowing, you made a reasonably large pivot at one point from trying to grow a kidney for yourself and others to what you now do, which is well aware. And there's a journey that I think we need to discover with that. But also, I guess it would be silly of me not to actually remark that how wonderful is it that we have modern science in a way where you did discover that there's an issue at 17, and now you're still pretty young. There's time for you to address things. You've learned an incredible amount. You sounded like a doctor as you just explained that to me. And so I'm grateful for you, and I'm sure you share some of that gratitude that you know what you know, and the amount of hope that there is in that system because of the world we live in and what you know is great.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to say a lot of this is coming with hindsight, because as much as I knew what I knew back then and was getting to know more as I was growing up and studying, I would say my behavior and thoughts towards it weren't always necessarily in alignment with me feeling, well on my way.
Right.
And so we'll probably, I don't want to spoil the theme of the whole story in that respect, but awareness, to your point, Josh, is a huge advantage. And I actually am really grateful to be, I want to say, almost decades ahead of something that could very much have become a problem. And I wouldn't have known I would have been none the wiser up until the point where it became a problem.
Yeah. Well, and selfishly, mindful, positive people like you, we need more of you in this world. And so the idea that you can preserve your time on this earth is good for all of us. So it just generally makes me happy. So let's talk a little bit about, let's get to that change, because in your story right now, you're a guy who's going to go grow kidneys.
Right.
And we know that you're not doing that today. You're doing something very different. Can I just ask, I guess, what happened?
Yeah. So there were a lot of things I learned about my whole career projection as I was going through my studies. I even went so far as to, I went to go visit a very famous doctor. I actually read her article in The Economist and reached out to her. She was studying in Broadmeadows. She was in Melbourne, Australia, doing work on growing kidneys out of her lab. And I reached out to her because I was going to go study abroad there. And I said, like, can I talk to you? I have a very particular situation. I kind of explained everything to her. And she's like, yeah, come hang out with me. Like, I promise I won't dissect you. I'm like, cool. I really needed that on paper. She kind of gave me a glimpse into what I was looking at from a timeline perspective, like in terms of what she was getting onto. And obviously I can't predict how quickly things evolve and change. I mean, technology at this day and age is just getting more and more wild. But when I saw her and what she was doing, and I saw what kind of progress that she was making, I had a very, very weird feeling that for the first time, I didn't think I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And what I was making conclusions about was really with respect to time. I didn't think I was going to have enough time to go down the path that she was taking to figure everything out that she was figuring out and meet one other condition that really mattered in respect to my life and world. So there's some context here surrounding who my dad is and how much of a person he means to me, because yes, he was a gynecologist. Yes, he studied medicine. Yes, he's my dad. My dad is 96 years old to date. I'm 28 years old for context. I mean, he's actually, today's the 9th. He's turning 97 in 5 days. I have always looked at him as my old man. And probably since I was a teenager, I've always, to say this pretty bluntly, I've always wondered what it'd be like when he was gone. It's not something that I think a lot of people try to think about with regards to their family, let alone a particular parent. But it was always a subject of conversation for him. Even for my dad, it was a subject of conversation for him because, I mean, granted, he's 97 years old almost. And it's been absolutely wild just watching the growth and trajectory of technology alongside his just pervasiveness and willing to live. He's literally said, hey, doc, like he's talked to his cardiologist who we've known for decades now. I just want to live to see my son's graduation. He didn't mention which one, but it became high school, then college, then a master's degree, and so on and so forth. And so I'm really blessed to have him. But at the time when I was going through my studies, I did not think I was going to get to this point of what I considered to be success, the milestone that I wanted to achieve. Again, this is what my thinking was at the time. I didn't think I was going to make it in time for my old man to see it happen. And that was incredibly important for me. And so at that exact point, Josh, I made the decision that whatever I was going to do, it had to be done faster.
Wow. So now you've got speed on the mind and you're not sure what you're going to do. You don't own a business at this point. It's not lost on
I'm just
me
a student. I'm just a biomedical engineering student with all these different things that are in front of me.
What's the next move?
So here's where I leaned. At the start of my junior year, which is when I was going through this particular pivot journey, I was starting to take business courses. I was, at that point, already 3 years into spending each summer volunteering at the biomedical labs in which I was essentially practicing my ability to become a tissue engineer. I reached out to my professors. I worked with everyone in both departments and said, I need to come up with something entrepreneurial. I need to come up with something interesting. Like, I want to find some measure of success in something that I can create right now. And what ended up happening was throughout my entire senior year, I actually took whatever I thought I could come up with in the labs with respect to some knowledge that I had in business, which was at that point still very minimal, just kind of like the classic theoretical of college, right? Just what you've learned from books. And I
Right.
said, okay, let's go try to build something. To keep matters short, my laboratory was very focused on a wound healing protein, which is called fibrin. It's essentially the protein responsible for clotting our blood every time we get a scrape or a cut. It's the thing that keeps us from bleeding out. It's fantastic. It's like a Band-Aid, essentially, if we didn't have Band-Aids. And so I decided, hey, let's figure out some. There was a lot of really interesting things going around with that protein, trying to use it in all matters of applications. And I said, okay, what can I do with this protein that could let me, commercialize an opportunity relatively quickly? Because again, we're living in this world of medicine. We live in this world of, you're trying to create value, but when you're doing it in the biomedical sense, like you got to be really careful. You're really impacting people's lives here in a very particular way. So me only knowing just so much of that at that point, I was told, look, you're in a hurry, you're in a pinch, you can't wait 10 years for the FDA to approve something that you may or may not get to work. And you don't have the funds for it. That was one thing they didn't say. But in hindsight, I was like, that's what they really meant to say. You're not going to figure this out on your own, kid. I decided to take my wound healing knowledge and this whole protein concept and say, all right, let's find something that's a little bit less, dangerous. I actually, of all things, found myself working in the world of cosmetics. And so I decided I was going to try to explore some kind of topical cream or a design that would take this wound healing protein and just take some of its properties and find some way to make it meaningful in the world of skincare. I mean, this is where I would say I really veered off of my course of at one point I was really focusing internally to the level of, organ tissue design. And now here I am at what I will call like the top of the world of vanity when it comes to the human body. We're talking about high level skincare and like this really luxury scene of skincare where it's like we're using all these really amazing organic body in focused wound healing. Like it was all these concepts, right? Because that was the whole beauty of skincare, if you will, or the beast. It's very vain. It was all about what you could sell. And that was my first foray into business. And it was weird and confusing, but also exciting. And at the end of the day, really not with respect to my character.
But you actually tried to commercialize it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can ask my friends. I tried creating the creams that I created lotions at home. I put my own money and time into the lab, so I would actually pay to work in my labs while studying business school. So this is my biomedical professors hate me for this, but they basically said, why don't you go farther down the path of technology? I'm like, because I know nothing about business. And I feel like if I know nothing about business, then I'm just going to be a lab rat. And engineers don't understand a darn thing about how the rest of the world works. That was kind of like my impetus at the time. So
Wow.
with that thesis made, they kind of looked at me. They're like, Conrad, whatever, go do what you're going to do. I studied business for a year. And in the meantime was like moonlighting, trying to go into the labs and doing this particular, application of wound healing meets, commercial topical skincare.
That was very Silicon Valley of you, if you think about it. I mean, you see the Steve Jobs story and, Wozniak, soldering in a garage and, whatever those images are. And so, like, there you are in the middle of the night. You're not, running Fortran cards in an old computer, but you're mixing chemicals and elixirs to try to put skincare together that you can commercialize. It's quite a fascinating senior year that you concocted.
You make it sound more interesting than I felt it was, but it was that, and it was not successful ultimately. I mean, it just proved to me that again I was operating way out of my depth of fields in various regards, and I really tempered to focus all of my time and energy in this. I was in fact looking back incredibly stubborn about making this pursuit of entrepreneurialism because I did not pursue any alternatives. I mean, I think I literally watched this on Shark Tank yesterday where, this lovely couple, one an engineer, another a lawyer, both went into their business together. And one of the first things that the sharks told them was like, I'm surprised that, not one of you decided to stay back and continue to sustain a high paying job. Because that's honestly really smart in the world of business. Like you want to consider where you're at with your cash flow at all times. So I took very risky bets because I felt like I had support, but also because I was just frankly ignorant. And as a result, after I finished my graduate degree, I could continue to pursue still into this realm of startup culture. I ended up applying for and getting accepted into a program in New York City. This called the Startup Leadership Program. I cannot thank these group of founders enough for being the types of people they are. This is just a program run by founders for founders. It's basically you pay to meet the cost of us keeping a meeting running, but everybody else is basically just operating out of their own free will and time. And it's just essentially an accelerator for founders being taught by founders. I went into that for 9 months while basically running myself around New York City for the first time ever, basically taking all manners of part-time jobs, internships, whatever was going to pay the bills. And then, I would just go home and live and sleep and hopefully eat.
It's funny,
Yeah.
the and hopefully eat. That does seem like we're burning a lot of cash, and this is the type of actionable thing that I love that comes up out of these conversations. Your observation with the Shark Tank story, that nobody watched the cash flow. They literally did the Nietzschean thing and burnt the ships, and then they have now sailed off into this entrepreneurial venture with no bailout whatsoever. And not that I necessarily believe in bailout. Sometimes you do have to take the leap, but boy, you got to have strategy and safety and cash flow in mind and all of these things that so many entrepreneurs don't have. And so there's the great risk, I think, and actually kind of that entrepreneurial myth that we all live with right now in our country is that you just have to take the leap and take the chance and believe in yourself and it'll be okay. And that's almost conflated with bootstrapping.
Yep.
The idea that, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, ramen noodles are okay. You'll be fine. Skip a couple of rent payments. You'll make it through. And that's not true. And hopefully you weren't that deep into it, but it sounds like you did take some of those leaps that were risky. And then you find yourself into this accelerator. What did you learn there?
Everything. I mean, one could argue that, again, it goes back to you can be thrown every single thing you could possibly ever learn about startups, which is just about everything. It's like, hey, want to learn how to run a business? Cool. Welcome to volumes 1 through 7. There's a lot to dive into. I got exposed to it all, much like I'd been exposed to the world of business for a year through grad school. Like I'd been exposed to biomedical engineering for 4 years through bachelor's. None of it applies as much as the school of hard knocks. But at the end of the day, you gotta start somewhere. And I'd say, thankfully, just through the relationships that I built, through just the experience of being in New York City, for better or worse, that then brought me to my actual taking. And I'll say that throughout, halfway through the program, I was still focused on being this biomedical engineering founder. I still thought that was going to be my process. It wasn't until halfway through the program that I really sat down with some of the fellow founders of mine and said, look, I'm going to be, just completely straight with you guys. I am not successfully doing anything right now. I am just barely making everything work. I am doing a bunch of odd jobs just to make bills reasonably, not purely negative. I am not attached to my lab anymore where I can't do any of that type of technical work. It's just me trying to figure out how to even run the business, let alone configure out the product. I just want to stop. I'm not taking care of myself. I don't feel happy. What am I doing wrong? That was the number one question I had to ask everyone around me, is what am I doing wrong? And what that ended up becoming was this conversation of what are you guys doing? Can I see how you guys operate and live in this world of startup life? I would love to see it. These were people who came from all different walks of life. These were folks who had families, full-time jobs, several years worth of career time. Compared to me, I was just super young and didn't really know much. So I was expecting to learn everything from everybody because they just simply had more time than I had. And so, I asked that question. And
what did you get from that? What do they say?
What they said was, Conrad, we completely understand what you're going through. We're going through it right now. And I kind of turned around. I was like, what do you mean you're doing the same? Like, what do you mean? Like, I thought I was suffering on my own. And yeah, granted, every founder comes to realize, and I think everyone, as soon as you meet a fellow founder, you recognize pretty quickly you've all been through the trenches together. But I didn't realize it was that bad in some respects.
Yeah.
Like, I thought I was the only one making poor decisions around the way I ate myself. Not to blame anybody for it. Like, they all got their lives to live, and they've all got complexities. Some of them definitely did amazingly, considering the situations that they were involved in, the commitments they had to keep up with. So, but at the end of the day, they showed me their calendar, and I only saw certain reflections of myself that said, like, this shouldn't be how this works. Like, yes, there's folks who are having success and there's people making progress. And yes, there's folks who aren't doing the same. Either way, everyone's got this time management game that they're dealing with. And it just doesn't look very fun. It looks incredibly stressful and chaotic. And I just wanted to know, like, how does that change? How does that get better? Because that was the very question I really ultimately needed answered.
So who answered that for you? How did you answer it? Where does this... so now you've identified a problem, and
yeah.
All businesses are out there solving a problem. And so now this is a problem that maybe somebody should solve. And, and our audience already knows that in some way you've already found a way to start solving that. And that is a marketable thing that you do now. But I'm just picturing Conrad at 10 years ago or however long ago it was. You're sitting at a boardroom table with a whole bunch of people all going, "Oh yeah, we're all going down in flames too. What are you talking about?" And you're like, "This can't be right." So at this point, like, what is kid Conrad at a boardroom table who now has a problem to solve? What do you do, and how do you solve this?
Yeah. So Josh, the first thing I did was I just said, look, number one, I'm quitting everything I'm currently doing. Like, I'm just buying back my self-time now by stopping the things that I think I thought that were right to do. And so that was my immediate first response, was just stop and think. And I really emphasized stop. Like, I just stopped doing a lot of things that I thought I was supposed to be doing. Then I just sat down with other people and said, let's just sit down and chat. I mean, it really comes down to, like, me just starting off as, like, this very naive but very positively thinking, just like headspace coach, and just said, can we just put the calendar on a screen together and just kind of look at it and just kind of try to prep things out and kind of put together a perspective of, like, what's going to happen this week or today, and what's on your mind, what things need to get done. Okay, cool. When can we get those things done? And it was just putting a little bit of order to it all and just saying, let's just sit down and think about this. I know that sounds incredibly simple, and yes, arguably anybody could do it. But I think when it came to sitting down with my fellow founders and some of the folks who, were also surrounding my world, who just wanted to have that chat with me because, hell, they were willing to hear me out. What they ended up walking away with, what I ended up walking away with, was the same thing that they did. It was just like, we both felt like, wow, that was a really good use of time. That really helped me. I feel a lot more squared away with, like, what I need to do. I'm not going to try to be too tongue in cheek about it, but I'm now more aware of what's going on, and I feel well about it. Or I feel like I know what I need to address. Like, it's not as overwhelming anymore. Even if it was a case of, like, yes, I was aware of it, but I wasn't really feeling good because it was a lot and it was stressing me out. And I just hadn't had the time to really sit down and kind of put it all on paper. I'm like, okay, cool. That's great. I love that exercise. I want to do that again. So I did a lot.
So you did a lot. I like that. And so, I mean, now you've got a marketable something. These people were kind of your test subjects, yes?
Yeah, very willing friends.
Yeah, so very willing friends. Are you charging them even anything for that, or are you literally freely experimenting on their lives?
Freely experimenting with them, alongside them, taking care of tasks and little things for them. I distinctly remember one founder, we sat down and we opened up this plastic bag of his that just had almost a decade's worth of, like, physical papers and things that he had just always meant to get to. And so just decided, like, hey, I'm just going to take all of this stuff, going to take everything that's it was in his office space, everything from home. We put it all together, threw it on the floor, organized it. Like, that was just an experience of just, like, can we just Marie Kondo this man's life just a little bit, just so he could feel like he has a sense of, like, just so we could put closure on all these documents that, it's this classic, I swear I'll get to it someday kind of situation. That was like my first real experiment. And yes, I wasn't paid to that. My first real paying client was actually someone who I met virtually who was living in New Jersey at the time. He was an entrepreneur and he was super busy. And I ended up helping him just think about where his time management was going with respect to his eating schedule, just so he could help lose a little bit of weight. These little things, like that was my first little paid project, but I really tried to just start off by selling myself as a coach, just saying, I'm here to offer my time to help you manage yours. Not really operational heavy. I just want to talk and kind of give you some, some peace of mind because we're going to spend some time together on this.
At what point were you like, whoa, I'm eating more than ramen noodles now? At what point did you have enough clients where you're like, this is a thing? And how did you notice it?
So Josh, this took a long time. It wasn't glamorous. I walked with my head down away from New York City and basically I actually took the train back because I had like 80 pounds worth of stuff that I was taking home with me. Like a bicycle, like just anything that I could consider my belongings. I took all that and took the train back all the way down to Florida. I stayed with my parents. The pandemic happened shortly after that. And so I ended up staying with my family, especially to be that kind of the person who would go outside of the house and go take care of things so that mom and dad didn't have to. I proceeded from there to continue to try to do this, virtual selling of my services and time. Josh, it took me years, realistically, to start getting more and more consistent with what was my messaging, what was I really selling, how was I offering what I was offering, how could I communicate that. It wasn't until I really started to switch from a purely personal concept of time management coaching to more of a business professional operations management component. I didn't even call it operations management for quite some time. It wasn't until I made that switch that things started to work out for the better. And then as a result of that, and I'll answer your question in kind, it wasn't until I started bringing on additional people to come and help me. So my first experience at some point with one of my clients was, hey, we could get these particular tasks done, but Conrad, you're really expensive. Is there some way we can find someone cheaper to do this? That became the call to action for my first foray into virtual assistants, and in particular, outsourced, offshore virtual assistants. I hired an agency, met a guy who I was networking with online. He ran an agency for that. I hired my first virtual assistant through him. Good experience, had some touch and go points, but I got the gist of it. Someone was now doing this job for effectively $15 per hour. And that meant I could charge I think it was like $100 something at the time to do kind of my focused work. But now I was able to offer this service where clients were able to not only get me and my sort of strategic thinking around time, but they got someone who was actually handling some of the manual labor that was coming out as a result of our conversations, where it's like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this either. Like someone else who you can afford to do that, like we should have that kind of assistance support. Let's go make that happen for you. So that once that transition started happening, that's when I started to realize like, oh my God, I can actually run a business and not feel like I'm completely failing at things. And it wasn't an overnight change. It took a long time.
It's interesting that you had moments of feeling like you were completely failing at things, yet at the same time, it sounds like you were bringing new success to your clients.
It was a huge change. And I think, again, going back to like what this all meant, like I was working from home. I was able to spend time with my family all the time. I mean, what I didn't really express a lot of, appreciation for back then, especially because pandemic life kind of has its paradoxes where it's like, yeah, you're spending all this time with people indoors, but it's all the time. So that was a tricky situation for a while. I ended up breaking out of that and ended up actually living in Wilmington, North Carolina for a period of time, then moved to Austin, Texas, still continuing the same business, just, I had the work from home capacity. I just kept working from wherever I was living. But those different places kind of gave me some time off from family after the pandemic until I was ready to return. In kind, things from that perspective, from like, okay, here's my first virtual assistant and here's how they're helping my clients. Okay, great. Now let's go have them help me as well, because since I'm at it, there are things that I really can't handle right now that I find a lot of chore and bother with, and I really just would love some help. So I started, eating my own dog food, if you will. and proceeding to go through that experience. And then, yeah, I
The
was kind of like,
baker's
oh my
family
God.
usually starves for bread. It's sometimes, it's weird. We had this problem for a long time here where I stopped making content for the business for almost 2 or 3 years. I wanted to focus on clients, and I always found an excuse to focus on clients. Uh, we needed to have this podcast years ago, and I think it's valuable. But back then I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that though doing a show like this is showing off what we can do for people. And it really is. I mean, this is our studio and it's our staff doing cool, good work. But my passion is entrepreneurship, and I never saw the connection. And so it took years to get my head around that. And then now we're finally doing that. It sounds like you had the same thing where it's like, I am helping all these people. This feels great. Why do I not feel great?
Yeah, I like the baker's family doesn't eat their own bread,
Yeah,
and I always had it from the shoemaker doesn't always wear their own shoes or make
that's
their own
right. Yeah, the
shoes.
cobbler always has holes in his shoes.
That's right, the cobblers. That's it. Um, so yeah, it was this rocky journey, but eventually I started to get more and more clear around how to operate my own business in this particular way, where I would take care of the things that mattered. I would have virtual assistants to help me support the things that also mattered, but were much more affordable to be done by someone once the workflow was well established. I mean, as many people know, when you work with other people, there are things that only you can do. And so it really behooves you to just focus on doing those things. So that process now has escalated to the point where at this stage, we now have over 10 virtual assistants working with us. We have gotten to a place
Wow.
where we not only think about the virtual assistant component from a manual labor process and that ability to just plug someone in and say, hey, they'll take care of this for you now. We've also looked into what are the cost logistics around automating certain functions. So it's not even about having a human being do it, but bringing in an automation engineer, a key referral partner of ours, whether it's through something as simple as no code, a little Zapier function here or there, to something more complex like using AI to do text generation for all manners of script work or what have you. That's kind of been the transition now, where we start to think more and more of how are these operations productizable or systemizable beyond just the service of being able to plug someone in and help take care of those things. And that's fine. It's always about figuring out what solution works best in the temporary, over the long term, and then having those discussions. So that's still where my headspace lives. But yeah, we've come a long way, I want to say. It's
Yes, you
been
have, and it's quite a journey. I mean, it's just you went to college for biomedical engineering, and now you're helping entrepreneurs buy their time back with 10 virtual assistants on staff ready to solve all of their problems. And I remember from our first conversation, you do get to spend a lot of time with your family. You have outside interests that you can pursue. It sounds like you have had an ample ration of your own Kool-Aid. Is that not the case?
Yeah, so right now, Dad and I have been watching. We've seen everything. Like he's a huge movie and like TV show buff. So honestly, it gets kind of tiring sometimes because I felt like if we're not in the middle of watching a current series of something, I have to spend a good several hours just browsing what he hasn't already seen. Um, and so that can be tough. But right now, we're in the middle of watching Bosch on Amazon Prime. Uh,
Mm,
Video, and he loves like detective and action shows, and I'm big into it myself. So we get to do that, on the nights where I decided like, hey, like I have some extra evening space. I know it's not good for me to like kind of watch screens after I've been doing a lot of that already, but I want to spend time with him. And
yeah,
if it's not that,
absolutely.
it's walking through the hallways when he's feeling good enough for it and wants to get his exercise in. We'll have these chats. I mean, again, he's still old. That hasn't changed.
Right.
um, but I'd rather be here working from home, being able to step out, grab a quick bite with lunch with him, ask him how he's doing, and then get to spend some evening time with him once I've kind of done and settled for the day. And I've got other social life activities as well, but like he's the one that matters most to me. So that's
That's
like
wonderful.
again, it's one of those things where it's like it's just happening, and I can't say. A lot of people tell me like you're so smart for doing that. I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes I don't feel, I don't recognize it. I feel like I'll recognize it a whole lot more when it's no longer there.
You
But
will, I promise you. And I'll tell you that. So my grandfather, Ed Waltz, was one of my. I guess I would call him almost a rescuer in the sense that my father and I'll go into this in a show at some point, but career felon. There were redeeming qualities of him, but there was a lot going on, right? And he also wasn't around terribly much, so and that's some of a blessing because I don't know that we want that to rub off on me. But my grandfather stepped up in a huge way, and he was my male, role model of how to be a strong man, how to be a fair man, how to be a good husband and family leader, and all these things I got from him. And a lot of the things that I've learned in life that I apply in life, I go back and you remember those wristbands, WWJD, what would Jesus do? I
yes,
have WWEWD, which is what would Ed Waltz do, and so when he passed, there in the immediate, I'm grateful that I was like, oh, he lived an amazing life. I am so grateful. And so his passing was not devastating in the same way that some people have a devastation, but I still find myself discovering seeds that he planted in my life to this day. And he's been gone for, 10 years, where I'm like, oh my God, that's why he did that. That's why I do this, and all of the nice and good things, And so I think, the more time you can spend with your father, the better. And as you live the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you'll be living his legacy for that time that you spent with him. And I think it sounds like you would not place reverence in a person and appreciation in a person based on your character that is misplaced. It sounds like you have identified a good dude. And so you carrying on his legacy benefits you and everybody around you in just really cool ways. So I think you're doing it so right, and I think you'll have a lifetime of discovering what it means in so many good ways. Can I ask you, are there any favorite quotes or lessons that your father has given you that you could share with our audience so that we get it? What's your dad's name?
my dad's name is Pierre.
Pierre Ruiz.
Correct. Yes, he was.
So Pierre Ruiz, gynecologist and father to a Conrad, has bestowed upon the world what?
Um, I'll share with you two quotes. One is it's sort of so my family is from Uruguay, from an ancestral standpoint. My dad was strangely enough born and raised in Paris, France, which is why his name is so French. Um, but really, my family originates from Uruguay. So we have, especially since we live here in Florida and have been doing so for many years, we have a bit of a Spanglish concept, much like every other Cuban out here and everybody else. But I think everyone thinks of Miami, they think of like northern Cuba, basically, and they're not wrong.
Kind of, yeah.
So it's a very simple quote, and all it is it's just never afloch, which Spanish afloch means to give up, and so it just says never give up. But we have it in this sort of Spanglish kind of term, and it's usually combined with that in like arriba, which just means like to go up. So it's like those two things that we'll usually tell the people whenever they're in a position where they're not feeling down and they like need some spirit, because that's kind of like the pervasiveness of my old man at this point, especially given his age. Like he just doesn't want to quit and has no intention of quitting. And I think that's a really cool thing to have at his day in life, because there's a lot of pain that comes with living in the way that he is on a day-to-day basis, just being old. A lot of pain from, I think, seeing different family and friend members kind of grow and age in their own respective ways. And I think it's particularly sad, not to be too somber, but when people call and it's to give us notice that someone that he's known for his entire life has passed away. It's a weird competition to win. So there's that quote. And then there's another quote that is really more just like a family plaque that sits in our kitchen. And it's in Spanish. The quote is, "La buena vida es cara, lo hay más barata, pero no es vida."
Can you
And so
translate it for me? My Spanish is
yeah,
pretty bad.
yeah. So the the good life is expensive. There is a cheaper version, but that's not life.
Look at that. I love that, and I think we've gotten so much of a great story from you. What I'd like to leave this episode with, your first quote. Can you say that again? The never give up one.
Never afloch. Yeah.
Never afloch.
Never afloch.
Okay. You're gonna have to like text me the actual spelling of that.
Sure.
We're gonna use that for sure, for certain, and probably I'll adopt it, especially the Ariba part. Not only am I aware of what that means, but I like that going up concept. But I hope you realize that you actually live that mantra. I mean, your whole story has been a no give up thing, even when you pivoted. Because you did pivot, and I think that's not a giving up thing. That's an awareness thing. To your point, I mean, your whole company is about awareness. But yeah, you literally live your dad's mantra, and I think that is super cool.
Thank you.
So, your service is necessary and needed for a lot of our audience. How do we get to Well Aware? How do we find you?
Josh, our main website is wearewellaware.com.
Awesome.
You can reach out to me. LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. It's where I am most active and most willing to respond.
Awesome. All right. So, hey, fellow entrepreneurs, if you're anything like me, you're always on the edge of having too much on your plate and moments of overwhelm. And I hope this episode's a little bit of a moment of clarity for you, that you need to be well aware that the overwhelm is real and it's actually incredibly common, and there's resources. And I hope you are in a never give up attitude in life in general. And one way to make sure you never give up is to find assets and partners like Conrad Ruiz and his team over at Well Aware. So yes, this is a little bit of an ad for him. No, I don't get anything for it. But when I find people who can help, we need the helpers. And Conrad's team is there for you and for me and for us. And we entrepreneurs can never give up and move up. Say it again. Say the phrase.
Never afloch.
Yes. All right. This is my new thing. Yeah. You're texting it to me later. I need this. So I don't think it's going to be a new tattoo. Actually, truth be told, I always have wanted a tattoo, but I always feel like I want to change them. And that doesn't work unless it's henna. So in spirit, in my mind, that'll be my new tattoo, but it's never going to happen. So, Conrad, I know we've got a hard stop, and I know you probably also want to go spend time with the great Pierre. So I'm going to let you go on with your day. And audience, we are always grateful for your attention. It is not lost on us that attention is one of the most valuable gifts you can give somebody. And I hope that as you're giving us your attention, you're growing and you're more able to handle your entrepreneurial journey. So this is Josh Pies. I am the Chief Attention Getter, and this is the Bootstrapped Unicorns podcast. Next episode is going to be great. Who's on it? I never know. I've got to look at the schedule. Maybe you can help me keep track of my schedule better, Conrad. But it's always a pleasure and a privilege, and boy, don't we learn. I'll see you on the next episode.